I'm not big on plagiarism. I try to avoid it when I can. And so I would just mention that this week's sermon is a Pastor Jake and TJ combination. I've done this one other time where I read the sermon. I'm like, man, that really speaks to me. And so I've just borrowed his points, but all the content in between is mine. And so if you're like, man, that was an amazing sermon. Well, I want to give credit where it's due. This is a typically start from scratch and write them, but I started with Jake's sermon as I read it. I'm like, that really communicates and convicts me of some things, and I want to preach that and then add mine to it. So I just thought I'd start at the beginning, and now I won't feel like I'm plagiarizing because I'm not plagiarizing. I just want you to know that as well as me. Here's the question as we begin. Do you like your job? Now, if you don't like your job, it's maybe a little late to say this. Please don't stand, raise your hand like, ooh, me, I don't like my job, and I'll tell you why. Do you like your job? Or if you don't, everybody here is in different spaces. Some people are students, and some people are retired, and some people are doing different things. Some people staying at home with kids, whatever. What you do during the week with your time, do you like it? It says in Paul wrote in his letter to Timothy that godliness with contentment is great gain. Do you find that to be the case for you? Do you find that to be the blessing that you have with your work? And here's the second question along with that. Does your job or whatever you do with your time like you back? Are you a contributor there? Are you appreciating the providence that God has given you with what he's given you to do with your time? And are you doing it under the Lord in such a way that those who you interact with there are like, man, I'm thankful for you and that you're here. Or maybe you've had a season or a day like this, maybe you haven't. But sometimes for some people, they're going about their work, or they go to work at their job, or they're going about whatever, and they're just kind of filling up space because they're just not that into it. They're not enjoying it. They're not having godliness with contentment in it. We've been in this series about relationships, different kind of relationships. We've touched on husbands and wives, and we've touched on parents and children as we've gone through these passages here in Ephesians. This is the last of the series, and we're going to touch on the workplace as we come to Paul's instructions to bondservants and masters. Now, most of you are not, I know I've never been a bondservant. And for sure, I'm not a master, nor have I ever had one. But arrangements for employment work differently in those days, and so I'll mention this when we get to this point in the text. But the bondservant really is related to anybody who has authority over them, and the passage to the direction to masters really deals with anybody who has authority. Why do we work? What's the purpose of work? We need money. That's a purpose of work, for sure. Might be the one you wake up and think about if your job was gone. Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do to pay the bills? But God's purpose for work is deeper than that and different than that, and is actually can be a little surprising sometimes to people. We think sometimes of the things that are difficult in life as being part of the consequence of the fall. But in Genesis 1 and 2, we see Adam and Eve at work in the garden before the fall. Before there had been any sin, God gave Adam work to do. God gave Eve work to do. And we see in Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. God put the man in the garden to work it and to keep it. I want you to think about this for a second. God creates the world, and he creates it right. God creates all that is at that time, and he created it good and beautifully and with excellence. And in that good, beautiful, excellent situation, we know of a few things. We know that at a point, Adam and Eve were naked, and they knew no shame. So this is a different kind of existence than what we have, of course. We're talking about the Garden of Eden. And so, we could list out a number of things. You might say, yeah, the food in the Garden of Eden. Boy. You couldn't, touch the one, you couldn't eat off the one tree, but the rest of it must have been great. Boy, here's something I would think about. Can you imagine how Adam and Eve slept in the Garden of Eden? Nothing to bother you? the sleep of the angels. I tell you, for those who struggle with insomnia from time to time, that would be amazing. The relationship they had with each other, the relationship that they had with God. These are all things that are qualitatively different than what we experience, and they must have been awesome. But what can easily be missed in all of that is they did not just get up and do their 20-hour worship service followed by 4 hours of sleep every day. In the garden, in the perfect place, God gave them work to do. They had work for their hands, and it shows us that work isn't part of the punishment that comes with sin. Work is not part of the punishment that comes with sin. It's part of paradise. Worship is not punishment. It's part of paradise. Jesus said, my Father is always working, and I too am working. Adam and Eve worked in the garden. The Father is working even now. Jesus, when he was here, he was busy. His hands were active. He was, before his ministry, of course, we know, a carpenter, but then during his ministry years, there was a consistent energy and movement forward and working. Do you think of your work like that? I know for some people it's real hard to do that because their work is not something that they're able to fully enjoy. I know for some people, it's like, I haven't really thought about that. Students, your work as students and what's asked of you in that work is not punishment or something you have to get through to get to the good stuff. It's part of the life God gave you. It's part of the blessed life. You don't just have work to do because you need money. You don't just have work to do because we're in a sinful, fallen world. You have work to do because God designed you for worship, but he also designed you to be busy and to work. And so in Colossians 3, where Paul says, whatever you do in word or in deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. It's calling us to joy and thankfulness in our work because it's how we're made. It's what we're made for. Godliness with contentment is great gain in your work because it's how we're made and it's what you're made for. So every job can be worship when it's done unto the Lord. Every job can be worship when it's done unto the Lord. And you can't worship God in the job you want, but you can worship God in the job you have. By the way, there's a lot of blanks on the note sheet, so either today you're going to go like through this and you're going to write a bunch, and that's fine, or you're going to have blank page, and that's fine too. But this beginning is part of what grabbed me about this week's sermon. I haven't always been content in my work. To be quite honest with you, I haven't always been content in my work as a pastor, but also in my times working in the workplace, I haven't always been content in my work. I have a spirit and like a personality that's inclined and attracted to the things that are not in my world. So like if I'm going home and the yard needs to be, like today, I got to go home and mow the yard because it's our way of not bagging our leaves this year. So we bag a lot of leaves, but we're mowing them this year instead and kind of mulching them up and whatever like that. Well, I got to go home and do that this afternoon. I could go home and have all three of my kids there, which we do today, because it was Carson's birthday. They're all here hanging out. I could have a lovely wife, and we're all five going to be together, and that's true. I could have a great couple of days coming up ahead of me and some time away, a little retreat. I'm going to be a part of a staff retreat this week. That's true. I could have a dog that I actually enjoy. I could have our bills, enough resources and money to be able to pay our bills. And I could go on down the list of all these different things that I could have that are good, which I do have. But when I pull in my driveway, the thing I'm going to notice is, man, I got to get out here and spend an hour on this yard. You know, I'm drawn to the things which are not. Now that's a work example, but I'm drawn to the negative thing. If something's wrong in my world, I kind of am the person who's the glass half empty kind of guy. And so that's true. That's something I have to watch. And to be honest with you, for people who are in my life close, it's kind of a pain sometimes. It's like, hey, Smile. Smile, be happy. I haven't always been content in my work. I wasn't always content as a student. I haven't always been content at different seasons in life, and that's touched my work. How about you? Are you content in your work? Are you content in the season that God has given you? If work is part of God's good design, part of paradise, not just part of punishment, if every job is a job in which you can worship under the Lord, if you're made not just for worship, but also made for work, if you can worship Him in the job that you have, what's your experience of it? And how has that been for you? This past year, let's say, how's that gone for you? And so with that thought of contentment and joy in the Lord, would you meet me in Ephesians 6, verse 5? Now, I mentioned this at the top. Bondservants here, I want you to just hear that as representing anybody who has somebody over you in authority. Bondservant here would be equivalent to those who have a boss. In Ephesians 6, having already addressed husbands and wives, having already addressed children and parents, he addresses this other fundamental relationship that we have of workplace. And he says, bondservants, those who have authority over you, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ. Not by the way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man. Work as you would work to Christ. Work as bondservants of Christ. Work as unto the Lord. Basically, work or serve like Jesus is the boss. Work or serve like Jesus is the boss. Now, I know there's a couple people in here that don't have a boss, and that's cool. But most of the time, most of us do have a boss, or we have somebody who is either in authority over us or somebody to whom we need to account in our situation. Those people aren't always great. The situations aren't always great. The pay is not always great. The work might not always be great. There could be a number of things that are not great. And you could allow yourself to have that kind of attitude that I mentioned earlier, the glass half empty kind of attitude. And I don't think that God's people always need to run around whistling while they work. That's not necessarily the picture here. But how would you serve today if Jesus was your boss? How would you work today if Jesus was the one that you had to account with, was in authority over you in the job that you have? And let me take it a step further, not in church work, not as a missionary, but as a student, as somebody who's working at home and doing whatever you're doing there, working in the job that you currently have. How could it be different, let's call it tomorrow, not today, if you were serving like Jesus was the boss? I would have a really hard time having a glass half empty if I was serving like Jesus was the boss. And the thing that grabbed me about this as I was thinking about it this week is, and I work in ministry. There's things I don't like though. And as a person who can be drawn to the glass half empty thing, I've talked to enough of us over time. I'm not alone. I know that we are all tend to be drawn towards our negatives. And sometimes we can tend to dwell there. Even in something as wonderful and productive for eternity as ministry, I find a way sometimes to be glass half empty or to lose joy in my work. You know, I honestly don't think I could if I was serving like Jesus was my boss. If in a practical, tangible way, I wasn't accounting to somebody at church, but I was accounting instead to Jesus at church, I just think I'd work different, wouldn't you? I think I'd feel different. But that's the biblical ethic. Like, that's what he calls us all to. Be a student as unto the Lord and work while you're a student like you're working for Jesus. Work in your workplace as unto the Lord and work while you're there doing whatever you're doing at your computer, in Excel, with tools in your hand, serving a customer, whatever, teaching, all those things. Do them like you're not accounting to your employer. Do them like you are accounting to Jesus. Work as though you're working for Jesus. See what a difference it would make. And for me, I just think it would make a huge difference if I was working for his approval and not for anyone else's attention. Working for his approval and not for anyone else's attention. So that's a I should and that's an ought to. We go on in verse 8. Paul writes, knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he's a bondservant or is free. So Paul attaches here the idea not just of how we are to live and serve with sincere hearts, with right hearts and full hearts as unto Jesus, but he brings in the idea of reward. Now we all know that Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, don't store up your treasure on earth where it's going to be destroyed, where it's going to rust, could decay, could be stolen. But store up your treasure in heaven. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Your treasure in this context, I think, is not just about how much money you have in the bank, how much equity you have in your house, how much you might have in an account towards retirement or not, any of those things. I think it's not just a measure here, what Jesus is talking about or what Paul is talking about, of tangibles. I think that part of the treasure is about the way you're able to hold your heart and your mind and your life during your day. Where is your heart? For where your treasure will be, there your heart will be also. Serving and working as unto Jesus is about living in view of reward. And where is your reward, or where is your storehouse of treasure? I've just been wrestling with, there's a way to be a campus pastor that is unto the Lord. There's a way to be a campus pastor that is storing up my treasure in heaven. And the flip side of that is true, because it's true for every one of us. It's weird to think about it with a pastor, I think. It's weird to think about it for a pastor. But there's also a way to be a campus pastor. It's not under the Lord at all. There's a way to be a campus pastor that is not storing up my treasure in heaven. So I'd like you to just think about what it is that you put into what would be the descriptor for you of your work. So for me, I just said campus pastor. 2 out of 3 kids are here this morning of Leachville. They're students. Jenny's here. She's a principal. What's yours? Whatever your thing is, think about this for just a moment. There's a way for you to be retired. There's a way for you to be whatever it is you are that is storing up your treasure in heaven through how you're conducting your heart and through how you're conducting your work. Storing up your treasure in heaven. And I think as Christians, we all know that. We all think that. There's also, though, for you a way to not do that. I was just struck as I worked on this and thought about this through this week that it is a shame to think about spending a week or a month as a Christian relating to your work, relating to God through the work He's given you to do poorly. It's a shame to think about doing that for a week or for a month. But there are some of us who might be in a season where we're relating to God through our work poorly for a year by not serving as unto Jesus, but being distracted by the people who are in between. For 2 years, missing the opportunity to store up treasure in heaven through the relationships God has given us in our workplace. 90,000 hours is the statistic for like the average person who worked full time through their adult years. We'll spend 90,000 hours in our work. Gosh, it's a shame if people miss it as Christians. There could be a perspective change for some of us to where we would say, I am not stuck. I'm not stuck in a dead-end job feeling underappreciated. I'm standing in a divine assignment, and God's taking care of my payroll. What do you think the percentage of people is who would say, I am satisfied and content and happy in my work in American culture? 0% to 100%. What'd you say? 20. Boy, you are on it. 20%. At least that's the statistic I saw. I definitely would always say it would be less than half, right? When you talk to people, hey, this and that, you think, I'm not sure. I'm sure there are more people who are discontent than there are that are content with their work, if you take it all in match. 20%. 20% of people would say, I'm good. I'm happy. Life's going well at work. There's a lot of people who would think in some avenue, not necessarily say I have a dead-end job, not necessarily say I'm stuck in there, but there is a perspective for the Christian to be able to intentionally say, I'm not stuck in whatever the job is God has given me right now. And I am standing in a divine assignment. God's taking care of my payroll. Think about your life. Think about your situation. And of course, there is ministry that could happen at all of our jobs. There are evangelistic conversations that can happen with the people that don't know the Lord that are around us. There are ways we can pray for and serve others in those situations. And that's part of this. But another part of it, too, is working in the field that God has given you right now and being able to do it with great joy. And I've known over the years the power that there is when you work hard with the Lord to shift perspective about something in your life that you're pretty ingrained in how you're thinking about. Work is one of them. It has been at seasons for me, and I know for many others it is for you. What kind of difference could it make for you if you are dealing with contentment issues with work, if you're part of that 80%? What difference could it make for you if you made it a point that before the Lord to pray and to say to yourself, I am not stuck in what God has put me in here. What I'm actually is assigned by what God has put me here, and He's taking care of my payroll. He's got me here as a student. He's got me here as a worker. He's got me here as a business owner. He's got me here as a teacher, whatever. He's got me here. God has put me here for sure to be about His purposes, but also to work because that's how He designed me to be. And I am going to figure out the way to have joy in Him here because it's what He's given me. It's His providence to me. I'm about to switch and talk for a moment about those who have authority, but I'd just like to say this one other thing about this. I'm convicted personally that I ought to be different at work than non-believing TJ. I'm going to step out of the pastor thing for a second and just mention that I spent about a little less than a decade working in the insurance industry. So now I'm not Pastor TJ. I'm former insurance guy TJ. I am convicted by God as a Christian that insurance guy TJ should be different in his work, in his bearing, in his conversations, in his countenance, in his thoughts, in his attitude, but I'm particularly going to mention here, in my joy. Christian, redeemed, insurance guy TJ should be a joyful, different kind of insurance guy than non-Christian TJ. But I know myself enough to know that that's not always been the case. And I also know myself enough to know that I'm like a lot of us. Bondservants, obey your masters and live under the authority that God has given you and do it with great joy because God has designed you to work and He's put you where He's put you as a divine appointment and He's worked it out so that it's able to help pay your bills if you're working for employment. Relate to your workplace, to the people in your workplace in that spirit. You are not stuck. You are sent and assigned there. Now going on, there's a word Paul has here for those who are in authority. In verse 8, He says, knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he is a bondservant or free. 9, masters, do the same to them and stop threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and that there is no partiality with him. Bondservant and master relationship in this time was a common employment relationship. It's not akin to the North American situation of slavery the way we would understand it in American history. Bondservants had rights, and their masters had rights, had expectations as well. Bondservitude didn't always last forever. But what's interesting here is that Paul addresses his instruction to that working relationship. There also were people who just went to work. They weren't bondservants. They just worked at the place. There were other employers that were not masters. They just paid their employee. Paul doesn't address that employment arrangement. He addresses the harder one. It's kind of like with husbands and wives. A little bit earlier, Paul says, wives, well, first of all, he says, everyone is to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then he says to wives, you should submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Then he says to the husbands, you should love your wives like Christ has loved the church and gave himself up for her. Between those, I'm convinced that the husbands have the harder draw. God has called every husband to love his wife in such a way that it's like the way that Jesus loved the church and the way that Jesus gave himself up for the church. Well, how did Jesus give himself up for the church? On the cross, and in purity, and an entirely devoted, sinless life. God has a responsibility for both husbands and wives, but I'm convinced that the responsibility that he has given to the husbands is the heavier one. And I think so by a lot. I have never felt like Jenny has any sort of responsibility towards me that is burdensome to her. I mean, she may at times, and I can be a bear. I mean, that's for sure. But what I mean is, like, I don't feel like the weight of, like, our relationship falls that way on her. But man, I feel like I have a ton of responsibility in our relationship and in our family and for our kids. And of course, we work together. But my point is, he's given us both responsibilities. And I feel like the weight on the husband is the heavier weight. God has instruction here for the bondservant, but the instruction here that he has for the masters, it's all about what authority is and what it isn't. For Jesus' followers, authority is stewardship, and it's not superiority. Leadership is not leverage over others. It's laying down your life for others. You know, and what Paul has called the bondservants to, he's called them basically to work with their heart, to work with sincerity, to work basically with honesty and with fullness of effort as though they're working to Jesus. Now, I think the byproduct of that is a great byproduct for the employee, by the way. Have you ever been in a job where you weren't that busy and just the days seemed to take forever? But then you also have been in a job situation where it's super busy, and so the time flew right by. Man, I think that when you are working under the Lord, it lifts your spirit, it lifts your heart, and you find work to do. If you're working for Jesus, you're not going to be wasting any time, effort, and energy, and it's the way to be. But then he turns to the masters who do have a relationship that's difficult with the bondservant because it's a servant and master relationship. It's not like what we might think of, but it's also not the same as straight employment. And he says to the people in those situations, don't act like everybody else. Don't threaten. Don't rule over in those ways. But instead, know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there's no partiality with him. There's a whole ethic all through Scripture about servant leadership, or what I think is the right term here, stewarding leadership. In your family or in your workplace, have you ever been around or under somebody as a leader who just made it better and easier for you to do what you were supposed to do because they were there? The opposite of a terrible boss. The opposite of a terrible husband. Have you ever had somebody that you had to count with in some way who you're like, for sure they're in leadership over me. But I'm happy about it because they make it easier for me to do what I'm called to do. They make it a blessing for me to carry out my part of the situation. I think God's instruction, both here and other places, to those who are in leadership, is we should never view our leadership as a chance to be great in anybody's eyes. We should always view leadership as a chance to serve other people. And for whatever it's worth, for me, whenever I have led and I know that I'm having a direct opportunity to serve somebody as a leader, it makes me so happy. There was a young woman that came up a couple years behind us in our church youth group when we grew up. And I went to Bible college, and she went to the same Bible college. And I came out of Bible college, and a couple years after that, I was able to be hired in our home church. But I noticed that for Kai, who was a friend of both Jenny and I, there were going to be less opportunities for that, for what she was looking to do. And by God's grace, I was given the way Kai talked about it. She's like, God used you to give me a place to stand in ministry. I love that. I loved that by something to do with what I was doing, there was a direct blessing to our friend Kai. And she had a job and an ability to serve and a place to stand because there was some stewarding and some serving that got done through leadership. And to be quite honest with you, at New Life, just so you all know, I really, really appreciated Pastor Steve and Pastor Jake. They're both great in the way that they do and lead, how they lead. I hope that I'm steward whatever leadership I have in a great way in the church and in my home as well. But leading is about serving, and it's about stewarding. I think we've all had opportunities to experience that in both ways that are good and that are bad. So I want you to take a look. We're going to put this list up here. I want you to think about which of these two sides of the chart relates to you and how you're living in relationship to your work. There's a way to go to work and worship yourself by working for status. But there's a way to go to work and work for Jesus by working to serve and working for service. There's a way to go to work and work for yourself by using people to climb. And there's a way to go to work and serve people towards Jesus. There's a way to lead with leverage. There's a way to lead with love. There's a way for you to live for your payday and for the other rewards that come with your job, and there's a way for you to live for the last day, for heaven. There's a way for you to live with the goal of your own happiness. There's a way for you to live with a goal to honor God. This is a workplace example of something we could apply to any part of our life, which is to say there are two ways to live. And Parker, if you just leave that slide up there. There are two ways to live. In the workplace, to live under the Lord, to live serving Jesus, leads you to a life inside of your workplace of laying down your own rights and prerogatives and then doing the things that are on the right side of that slide. Working to serve others, serving people towards Jesus, leading with love, living for the last day, having a goal to honor God. Is that you at work? Is that you at home? Is that you as you lead? Is that you as you are led and instead work under the leadership of somebody else? But on the other hand, there's the flesh way. There's the self-oriented way. You could be working for your status, and you could be doing all the things that are on the left side. And I'm questioning, again, is that you? Are you a Christian who is self-oriented and therefore selfish in the way you're approaching your work? There are parts of some of us that are harder to penetrate than others. And the workplace is one, I think, that doesn't get challenged quite as much. Who are you worshiping on Monday at 10? On Thursday at 4:30? And he just caught my eye, but Caleb's having work experiences. He's doing a co-op right now, and so he's going and plugging into these workplaces for 4 months, then going back to college. And some of the conversations, you plug in different environments, like, he's having experiences to see certain people communicate in ways that are helpful in serving of others, and maybe also communicate in some ways that are less so. We all have those experiences with others. My question for you is, when you go to work and you're not in church mode, are you working in a way that is according to your design as a worshiper? Are you allowing yourself either to be discontent or to be selfish, or to in some other way not have Christ on the throne of your life, but instead to be enthroning yourself in how you're approaching your work? We all relate to our purpose with work differently. I'm somebody who has really latched on early to the idea of calling, and I pursued one. And that's made my great day, my days at work that are great, and the days of ministry and church that are great, even greater. Man, this is in line with what God has called me to do, and there's fruit or there's joy, and it's awesome. There was a day a couple of weeks ago that I led worship at chapel on a Tuesday at New Life Gahanna, and I kind of felt like God showed up, and it was great. Like we all have those moments in church and life and ministry. But to be honest, it's also made the bad days worse. Like, hey, you're called to this, and it's hard. Or right now it's unsatisfying. Or maybe the need that you have over in this other area of your life is not going to be fully met here. You're going to have to figure out some other way. And I have allowed sometimes my contentment with the Lord to rise and to fall with how those waves have rolled in my life. I don't think I'm unusual in that. I just think it's a little bit unusual to talk about that in terms of pastoring and ministry. But just like in your relationships inside of a marriage, God has a way for a wife to be and a way for a husband to be. And just like in a household, God has a way for parents to be and a way for children to be. It is the case, and not just here in Ephesians 6, but all through the Bible, that in your work, whatever that is, wherever it is that you're spending this week's portion of those 90,000 hours, boy, does God have a way for you to be there. God has for you to be able to be God's man or God's woman on the job site, at the school, as a student, whatever. God has a way for you to be God's man or God's woman as a stay-at-home mom or dad or doing whatever it is that you're doing. There's a way for you to be God's man or God's woman retired. And isn't it the case that in any of those circumstances, we can find our way to difficulty? We can find our way to discontentment. And so I just want to finish before I call us to a time of responding with this passage, also from Paul, but this is from 1 Timothy, where he says that godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. At work, there's a way for you to experience godliness and contentment. At work, there's a way for you to experience piercing yourself with many pangs. I just encourage you to think about how it is you're following Jesus in your work. There's joy for you there. Contentment for you there. Peace for you there. There's also fruit that you can have there if you are God's man or God's woman in whatever portion of those 90,000 hours you're having right now. However good it is or challenging. However fulfilling it is or lacking. There is joy that you can have or that you can sacrifice based on it if you come to work as the full person that God has called you to be and find your joy and contentment in Him through the work He's given you to do today. So back to the top of the sermon, as I read this sermon from Pastor Jake, I'm like, man, I needed to hear that this week. I wonder who else might need to hear that. And I'm honestly not sure how well I've preached it. But let me just tell you the favorite thing that I did this week that touches work. We had a broken toilet at my house. Now, I want to just caveat that by saying it was a broken handle. And specifically, it was the little plastic piece that ran from the handle to the chain that pulls up the deal. I just want to make the point that this is in the clean part of the toilet, okay? I want you to know that I was able, by the grace and providence of God, to go to Home Depot, get the part that was needed, and successfully, on the first try, fix the toilet before our kids got home for the weekend. I don't know if heaven rejoiced, but I sure did. It was awesome. It was a joy to be able to do something to serve others. Last night we had our men's cookout that we've been doing once a month here this year, and they're Jeff Menennick's house. And I usually park at the same spot. And where I park, I get a view into the gate of Jeff's garage. Jeff's got a garage and works on things there and does magic. We've worked on a few of my cars in there, and every time we have, it has been successful and free. And I have really great experiences with that in Jeff's garage. And it makes me happy just seeing the place because he decided to serve. But it feels great to serve somebody, doesn't it though? It feels great to serve somebody else. And when you're part of something like that, you can have positive association. But at the same time, I have had times where I will go to my place of work and I'll flip on the light in the office and I'm not happy to be there because I have allowed discontentment into my world at work. I have allowed obligation and, man, doesn't this suck, into my soul. Now, you may not know what that's like, but I bet you do. And God has something better for you. And it might be something as simple as fixing the toilet. I picked up a couch. This is me, the last one, by the way. I picked up a couch yesterday because we wanted to get a pull-out couch for guests at our house, and we were very excited. It was very nice. We found out actually we got it this queen size, length like across, but it's only queen size for shorter people because it's not a full length. So that's great. And anybody who comes to our house, if you're tall, they'll have to sleep on this, whatever. But when we got to the house, I had the right drill bit to be able to take the drill and zip on the feet quickly and properly and right the first time. And it just felt really satisfying. Why? Because it feels great to do something simple to serve others. And I just want to encourage you at your work or at your home to think about the way that you can do something simple to serve others that comes out of a heart that is thinking of walking in worship with God. And that this doesn't feel spiritual or religious, and I'm not sharing the good news with somebody. I'm just doing my job, but I'm doing it unto the Lord. I am telling you, it makes a difference. When you're not doing it, you know it. Here's my last word. I'm just looking at the clock. I got time. No, the other one was my last little story about doing something physical and tangible, okay? C.S. Lewis, who wrote a lot of great things, but I'm just going to mention Mere Christianity and Screwtape Letters and the Narnia series. Wrote some letters to friends of his, correspondence, in his 50s, basically telling this friend that he had begun to experience grace and experience Christ in a way that he never had before. Now, outside of like preachers, for me, C.S. Lewis is kind of top of the heap, you know? Like he created a character that has shown parts of Jesus to like the world through Aslan. C.S. Lewis is awesome. And in his 50s, he had significant enough things to learn about Jesus and walking with him and following him and belonging to him in his 50s that he could write and talk about how he like now knew the Lord in a way he never had before. I just love that little story. And my point of sharing it here at the end is just never too late. You are never too old to turn something around. You are never too old to experience God in a different way. And as I pray here in a moment, I'm going to pray that we would all have the opportunity to experience God in our works if we need it, maybe a little differently next week than we did last week. The worship team would come on up and get ready. I really am done now. Who knew? And if Dave and Lauren go to the back for prayer partners. If you'd like to pray together, Dave and Lauren will be at the back. Pray with them. We're all going to sing and respond to God in one way. And I just want to ask you this as we come to sing. What one thing could you do different that touches on how you're spending your time or your work that would help you walk in a way that was more unto the Lord? If God gives you something to do, then purpose in your